We're talking brace height basics for beginners. Let's get to the point. Did you know that if you make your bow easier to pull back, then it could go faster? Brace height affects hand vibration, bow speed, draw weight, and knock point. A lower brace height will have a lower draw weight, as well as a smoother shooting bow. But it can have wrist slap, but your arrows do go faster. Whereas a higher brace height has a heavier draw weight. It's a slower shooting bow instead of a faster shooting bow. You probably won't slap your wrist unless your form's horrendous, but there is often more hand vibration. I tested all of these things on a previous video, seeing if it was faster. And through that test, I used like 4 or 5 bows and I tested out different brace heights. And what I found is that overall, a lower brace height has a lighter draw weight. Not for every bow, so some bows don't do this, but for most bow designs, it's a lower draw weight. But also, it's a faster arrow. I think the reason it's a faster arrow is because the string and the limbs travel further forward. Even though it's a lower draw weight and easier to pull back, the arrow actually goes faster. And then from testing out a bunch of different bows myself, I found with most designs that it's also smoother to have a lower brace height as long as you're not slapping your wrist. So with this in mind, I started shooting lower and lower brace height bows. And this is how I like to shoot most of my bows, is maybe a 1/2 inch to 1 inch lower than the manufacturer's recommendation. The biggest downside is gonna be wrist slap. If you're starting to get wrist slap, that's probably too low, and I wouldn't want to shoot a bow where it's even slapping my arm guard every time. So this is how I set brace height. First, I'll start with a higher brace height. Most bows come with a recommendation. Not all, but if you're getting a custom bow, definitely will. Some of the cheaper bows aren't gonna come with a recommendation, but the string at the distance it is when you receive it is probably the recommendation. With that, I want to start with a larger brace height, and then I'll reduce the brace height. To get a starting point to measure brace height from the throat of the handle to the string. And with the T-square, you can just slap it down there like that and see this one's 7 inches. You don't need a T-square, you can just grab a tape measure or a ruler, put it in the throat, measure the distance. Now I go by feel. What feels the best to you? And I think that's the most important thing. I raise this up to 8 1/4 inch brace height, and I would shoot this right here. Shoot it as many times as you want, and then lower your brace height a little bit. How do you lower your brace height? Well, you can unstring your bow and untwist the bowstring. Now, if you have an endless loop bowstring, you may not be able to untwist it at all, and you may just be stuck with where you're at. That's why a Flemish twist string is really nice. So I'll start at the top end and then untwist it 1 to 3 twists for every time I shoot it, and just shoot it again and again until it feels fantastic. And then if you start feeling slap, I would wear an arm guard for this part. If you hear it slapping your wrist or feel it through the arm guard, I would raise it back up and find that sweet spot for your specific bow that shoots good for you. That's what it comes down to. Start high, I incrementally go low until it just feels proper, but I go beyond it. So I'll continue on until I notice it's starting to slap my arm guard. As soon as I'm like, okay, that's a little too low and it's just feeling a little noodly, the limbs are moving too much, then I'll raise it back up, and then right when it feels proper, I stop there and I put my knocking point on. Now, I like to write this down somewhere. Know what your brace height is. That way you can always test, because here I have a 6 7/8 inch brace height. If I twist this and raise it to 7 1/4 inch brace height, that's gonna change my knocking point. And when my knocking point changes, my arrow becomes out of tune. So if your arrows are flying a little wonky, maybe your bowstring got twisted a little bit. When I'm transporting my bow and I take my string off of my bow, I often like to grab just a little clamp like this to put on the string, and now this is gonna keep it from untwisting. Now, you don't have to use a clamp. You can also kind of tie it through itself to keep it from untwisting, but that's beneficial to make sure when you put your bowstring back on your bow, it's at the proper brace height immediately. As you're setting your brace height without a knocking point, it can be hard to shoot your bow, because if you shoot 3 under, your arrow will potentially slide up the string. So I like to use a little piece of duct tape to put on the string, and the duct tape's gonna act as my temporary knock point, so that I can put the arrow right underneath it and shoot with 3 under. If you shoot split finger, you can actually get away without having duct tape on the string and just using your fingers to hold it in place. Don't pay attention to your arrow flight. That's not so important when you're figuring out the right brace height. Pay attention to how the bow feels. You can even blind bail shoot. Close your eyes and just shoot. See how it feels and adjust it to where it feels proper. And from the moment where it feels really good to you, from that point in the bow, you can tune the arrows to the bow. You can tune your knock point to get it all dialed in after that. That's how I set my brace height. Some of you may set it a different way, or even have a better way to set it. So let us know in the comments how you set your brace height. Thanks for watching today. Stay shatterproof, and I'll see you on the next video.